What the fuck is up, world? Biali, Tlaltik Bak. We back in this bitch. Another podcast for that ass. Another Grito. Sea dicho. Coming about a week's time now since our last podcast on some Project Bluebeam shit. And getting ready to get back in the mix with some more of that Nietzsche shit, right? Now, before I continue, you already know the deal. Shout out to all you motherfuckers that have been listening to this, who stay listening to this shit on the YouTubes, on the apps, on the gram, whatever the case might be. I appreciate the fuck out of it, dog. Believe, okay? Speaking of the socials, at least, the Instagram most specifically, because, you know, I don't really fucks with the other ones, but OG_IceNice13 on the gram. You know what it is. You can follow your boy along if you'd like and keep up with some shit that I talk about offside about this podcast, but, you know, outside of it, additional complimentary shit, you know what I mean? For those of you who've only come in along via YouTube or the podcast apps, and for those of you who are, you know, just tuning in through the social medias, what's good, fam? I see you, you know what I mean? I'll keep slicing and dicing these fucking clips up so that you can continue to, you know, enjoy for the, you know, the podcast along with us, you know what I mean? Anyways, I got a lot to get through today, so I'm gonna just jump right into it, dog. Picking up on the Nietzschean shit, okay? Specifically, today I wanted to discuss the doctrine of eternal recurrence. It's one of those Nietzschean ideas, this doctrine of eternal recurrence, that I feel doesn't get enough love, right? I mean, there's people that have talked about it. Don't get me twisted. I'm not gonna come up here and talk, you know, front like I'm teaching you some shit that you ain't probably never heard of. I'm just saying that me personally, I feel as though this doctrine doesn't get enough love in Nietzschean philosophy, and understandably so. It's usually overshadowed by what many people consider to be the culmination of his philosophy, and that is the uber-mensch, right? Many people consider the uber-mensch to be the culmination of his philosophy, but the funny shit is, dog, that Nietzsche himself, he considered it to be the doctrine of eternal recurrence, okay? That the uber-mensch culminated in his entire philosophy with the doctrine of eternal recurrence, okay? And because of this, I know that, you know, if you've been following along sequentially, given the Nietzsche shit that I've been discussing since the start of the new year, I keep saying that I'm going to talk about the uber-mensch. I'm going to talk about the uber-mensch. And I guess I give the impression that it's going to happen in the next episode, but it's coming soon, right? And the reason it's not this one particular episode is because I feel that in order, even though the culmination of Nietzschean philosophy is with the doctrine of eternal recurrence, I personally feel as though it helps to situate the uber-mensch with the doctrine of eternal recurrence. So I like to ground the uber-mensch in the doctrine of eternal recurrence because it helps me at least, okay? So yeah, I like to start with the uber-mensch and use it as the grand crescendo of his thought, right? And then move on to some of his more minor thoughts that get looked over because of how, you know, prominent these one particular thoughts are, right? So that's going to be this podcast today, dog. I wanted to talk about the doctrine of eternal recurrence in Nietzschean thought, but more importantly, because the doctrine of eternal recurrence, it's a pretty small idea. I mean, it's a pretty small piece of his work. Even though it's the culmination, he considered it the culmination of his work. It doesn't really constitute a lot of his work. It's such a succinct idea. You know, that was Nietzsche's whole shit. Write complex ideas in a very simplistic term. And, you know, the doctrine of eternal recurrence is no difference. Okay. So, I mean, I could get through a doctrine of eternal recurrence in like 15, 20 minutes and then explain it. You know what I mean? But I felt as though I felt a lot of things, dog. I'm just going to be honest with you. And it's going to be the point of this episode to try to draw them out. Right. And, it's not just the eternal recurrence shit. It's the shit that I, you know, been going through in my own personal life because I like to demonstrate how the philosophy that we're teaching, how it applies in a personal manner, bro. And when I personally was sitting down to write this shit, it resonated very deeply, dog. And the podcast kind of took over to that side, right? So I guess rather than continue talking about it, let's just get straight into it, right? So essentially what this doctrine of eternal recurrence states is that every single event and every sequence of events repeats itself in an infinite number of times. So that's the basic gist of this argument, right? This idea that there's a finite amount of possibilities in an infinite amount of time. And that because of that, eventually the finite amount of possibilities are going to run their course, at which point, ideally, they will repeat again since they have eternality of time in which to do so, right? So the importance of this doctrine for Nietzschean philosophy as a whole, dog, as a whole. It lies in its an appropriation of, it's a test, okay? It's the importance of it rests in the importance of it as a test, okay? And the test here being specifically for the merit of one's life, your life, my life, etc. You know what I mean? It's a test that we administer to ourselves. So specifically, it's going to be a test about to determine whether or not we are living the ideal life that we potentially, value. And I say we potentially because obviously, a recurring theme through both this Nietzschean and now philosophy that I've been talking about is the subjectivity of it all, right? The idea here specifically being that what I can handle psychologically is going to probably vary differently from every other person on this planet. You know what I mean? And that because of that, it's, this is not a test, a one size fits all test. It's got to be undertaken individually in the sense that, as, we come to see with this at the culmination of this podcast, the ultimate, merit of the ideal life is based upon whether or not the tests, these psychological tests that we engage in are manageable on our behalf. Because if it's filled with more of those a failure of those psychological tests, that means we're causing ourselves pain, if you will, then it's not really going to be an ideal life. You know what I mean? Because it's going to be filled with just pain and suffering. So anyways, for Nietzsche, this ideal life, obviously it culminates with that of the uber-mensch, okay? And more specific in this particular sense, the uber-mensch, according to Nietzsche, is going to be that person which treats the prospect of eternal recurrence with delight, right? And it's the delight part that really always sticks with me, bro. Like whenever I'm, facing just some overall life shit in general, I always consider to myself, and I generally frame it in terms of the doctrine of eternal recurrence, which is funny because I would do so probably like you too, long before I even learned about the doctrine of eternal recurrence. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is I would imagine if I would have to live this moment forever, for all of eternity, an infinite many number of times. You know what I mean? And then consider basically whether that be a joyous proposition or a fucking terrifying proposition, right? And that's the general idea. Because ideally here, if you're gonna repeat it infinitely many number of times and it's terrifying, that's very difficult. That's very difficult to deal with psychologically. And that's the basic idea that Nietzsche's going to get at here with this doctrine of eternal recurrence. He's actually got this one great passage, I believe, me personally, that, he explicates this point so beautifully, dog. In my personal opinion, honestly, it's one of the most impactful and beautiful works of not just philosophy, bro, but of literature that's ever been written, right? I'm obviously a Nietzschean fanboy, so, obviously I'm going to fucking, just stand over that kind of shit. But it really is, man. And it's so beautiful to me that every time I teach this shit, the eternal recurrence, I don't even bother trying to paraphrase it, bro, because of how eloquent I believe it is. I read that shit fucking word for word, bar for bar, son. You know what I mean? And I guess right now it should be no different given the fact that I am talking about it, and it is the fucking, it's the passage that contains the idea of eternal recurrence. So Nietzsche tells us, what if a demon crept after thee into thy loneliest thy loneliness someday or night, and to thee said, this life as thou livest at the present, and has lived it, thou must live it once more, and also innumerable times, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and every sigh and all the unspeakably small and great in thy life must come to thee again, and all in the same series of sequences. And similarly, this spider and this moonlight among the trees, and similarly this moment and I myself, the eternal sand glass of existence will ever be turned over once more, and thou with it, thou speck of dust. Wouldst thou not throw thyself down and gnash thy teeth and curse the demon that so spake? Or hast thou once experienced a tremendous moment in which thou would answer him, thou art a god, and never did I hear anything so divine. If that thought acquired power over thee as thou art, it would transform thee and perhaps crush thee. The question with regard to all and everything, dost thou want this once more, and so for innumerable times, would lie as the heaviest burden on thy activity. Or how wouldst thou have to become favorably inclined to thyself and to life, so as to long for nothing more adamantly than for this last eternal sanctioning and sealing? So again, a very poetic, aphoristic way to just basically convey the idea that imagine you're visited by this fucking demon. he calls it a demon because of the specter of the idea that it introduces. But not in the Christian sense is what I'm trying to say. But this demon comes to us and it just gives us it gives us the truth, dog. Like imagine this life that you're going through right now. You're going to live it an infinitely many number of times. How are you going to react? Are you going to react with fucking sorrow and dread and terror because of how miserable your life has been so far up to this point? Or are you going to fucking jump up with joy and fucking proclamation and, with glee, knowing full well that you're going to get the opportunity to, live this life and all the joys and all the sorrows and all the heartbreaks and all the great stuff that's happened infinitely many number of times, right? If you are of the latter, then you are more so inclined towards this uber-mensch that he believes to be the ideal life, right? That this test of eternal recurrence helps us measure, okay? So again, the key word here is delight, homie. And when we sit down on this word, and me personally, as I was sitting down with not just this word, but this statement, every time, like, it just never fails, dog. It hits me how deep this shit really is, homie. There's that great Kierkegaard quote where he talks about how the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. That's the same shit. You know what I mean? I talked about it before. Nietzsche and Kierkegaard are basically the same philosopher. So it shouldn't be, that surprising that they're conveying the same idea, right? In this particular sense, he's putting us on blast, yo, for faking the funk, you know what I mean? And jeopardizing the opportunity that we have at every chance, at every moment in this life to make something of it, homie. I know me personally, there's still shit to this day that I think to myself, like, man, I really wish I could do that. But then I think to myself already how old I am. And I'm just like, man, I should have done that shit when I was, 13, 14, 15 years old, not when I'm 35 years old. It's too late for me already. You know what I mean? But that's bullshit, dog. Like I could fucking start that shit right here today. There's no time like the present. In fact, if we're going to follow this Nietzschean philosophy to a fucking T, there is only the present. So it doesn't really matter if I'm fucking 13 years old or 35 years old. You can still pick up that hobby that you've always wished to yourself that you could do and get cracking on it, dog. You know what I mean? Because again, there is no distinction between the time. It's just the present moment that we have now. Right? So, in that particular respect, the same is true about trying to, draw our lives, if you will, out of that pit, right? Let's say of nihilistic despair in this particular instance at every moment that we have. It's a daunting battle, but it's one that we have the opportunity to do so at every single moment, every single day, every single fucking whatever, dog. There's no need to wait until Monday to start that New Year's resolution type shit. There's no need to start till January 1st to start that New Year's resolution type shit. You know what I mean? Because it's all the same moment. And with the idea here being is that understanding the tremendous weight that this choice, it carries, that it bears on it. And the choice is that doing so, or not doing so will make the difference between whether or not we jump for joy or whether we fucking break down on the ground and start in tears and start weeping when the demon comes to us in our loneliest of lonelies and tells us that this life that we are living as we're living now with every single moment is going to repeat an infinitely number of times. You know what I mean? So in that respect, again, this fucking Nietzschean idea of eternal recurrence, it's an ethical dilemma, dog. All right. And obviously for Nietzsche, that implies aesthetic, because as we've discussed before, ethics are an aesthetic for Nietzsche in terms of how we live our life. But it's an ethical imperative, more importantly, I would say, the application thereof, right? Because this doctrine itself lays the foundation for all the important choices, the moral choices that we're going to make regarding our life, okay? Now, despite the fact that it is an ethical theory, it's still defended on metaphysical grounds, okay? And the metaphysical grounds, they were influenced by the popular physics of Nietzsche's time. He got really deep into the physics of his fucking generation. Like, this was he died in the 19th century. It was 18th century Europe, dog. He died, right at the turn of the 1900s, 1902, I believe, 1903, sometime like that. You know what I mean? So, he was deeply influenced by the fucking physics about that time when he was establishing this doctrine of eternal recurrence, right? And thus the basic, even though it's not physics, it's in physics in terms of like Newton and shit. It's metaphysics. You know what I mean? In terms of like the possibilities of all possible worlds type deal. wrestling with this idea of infinite and what it entails, the infinite possibilities and all that kind of shit. You know what I mean? The multitude of, infinite universes given within an infinity, right? And because of that, that's what I mean when I say that his argument is grounded in metaphysical terms, okay? So the basic structure, I guess, if you will, rests on the three premises that are based, again, on the physics of his time. And the first premise is it's simply the law of conservation of energy, right? And it tells us that the amount of energy in the universe is fixed and finite, okay? The second premise that it rests on is the idea that the number of possible energy states in the universe is also finite. Now, I'll define these energy states here shortly, but I'll finish first with the third and last premise, and that is that time is infinite, okay? From this, Nietzsche is going to argue that every event, every configuration of energy state, if you will, okay, they will recur infinitely many number of times, right? Because again, there is only a finite amount of possibilities. When I was writing this, I couldn't help but think about the crab specifically. For those of you who know a little bit about the crab, you'll know that this motherfucker has gone extinct multiple times. It's gone extinct and re-evolved back into existence multiple times. And every single time it keeps re-evolving back into its current form time and time again, which leads a lot of fucking scientists to believe that perhaps that is like the ideal form of creation is the fucking crab. Pretty funny shit, honestly, when you sit down and think about it. This shit is called carcinization, dog. And, it's just fucking a trip how animals, how this shit just keeps re-evolving back into existence. And scientists have no idea why. Which, if you ask fucking edgy shit posters like myself, the fucking idea is simple, is that the crab is the peak of evolution, right? Everything after that is just a fucking mistake, homie. That's just a joke, obviously. It's just a stupid fucking joke. Anyways, and going back to this Nietzschean philosophy, the same for him, he's going to argue, is that every finite sequence of energy states repeated, will repeat, I should say, right? And that includes one's life, which is, relatively short. And it's a short sequence of energy states, bro. And because of that, they're going to recur infinitely many times over and over, and that they already have, you know what I mean? So this is, I don't know, man, this is like just tripping out on it, because this is why I fucks with Nietzsche, dog. And because realistically, this is nothing more than the Nawa telling us thousands of years ago that Deot was this fucking sacred vivifying energy that, manifested itself in a multitude of forms infinitely with, and that it took fucking boundless number of shapes, right? And forms, including humans, trees, etc., and the like. And this is essentially akin to what it is that Nietzsche is telling us. For him, it's not going to be so much in terms of, Deot manifesting itself so much as the sequential number of events that our lives are going to, possibly partake in. But the idea is it's similar nonetheless. You know what I mean? In that this is an infinitely recurring cycle. And as we're going to come to find here shortly, it doesn't have a fucking predetermined beginning or end point. Okay? Another thing that I personally find interesting about this doctrine of eternal recurrence is that what's interesting is that, it actually holds its own weight when it's placed against like Newtonian physics and shit, dog. In fact, despite the fact that, thermodynamics came after Nietzsche died, this doctrine of eternal recurrence, it closely resembles the considerably more complicated scientific theories of thermodynamics, yo. And then I guess most importantly, it's that as a thought experiment, I don't know. The reason I keep emphasizing the scientific element is because there's some who try to knock this doctrine of eternal recurrence as being fucking somehow irrelevant because it's, according to them, non-scientific, but it's not true. Like, it's clearly fucking, it's got justification in the realms of physics, not fucking direct, but very closely. You know what I mean? For one. For two, perhaps most importantly, it's a fucking thought experiment, homie. Okay? And, it doesn't necessarily need to it doesn't necessarily need to have a sound scientific foundation to make an impactful point. You know what I mean? We've already seen that shit with the example of the fucking fat man in the trolley, dog. Like, obviously that's not fucking rooted in reality, but it allows us, again, as I mentioned before, to think about ideas that we normally wouldn't be able to otherwise. You know what I mean? And as an ethical issue then, it's, there needs to be no more justification for it than how it applies to us in a perhaps practical manner. I don't fucking give a fuck if Isaac Newton can justify the doctrine of eternal recurrence. I care that it could fucking, help me consider the choices that I'm making now in my life as to whether they're, of merit or value or perhaps even of importance, whether they're worthy of my energy at that given time or not. You know what I mean? So, the basic gist here being, because as this is the foundation for the uber-mensch, dog. And if the uber-mensch is the ideal for the perfect life, then, and if that life must resemble this fucking great work of art, then every action that I engage in must be intentional, bro. You know what I mean? The same way that a great work of art doesn't have too many brushstrokes or too few brushstrokes. It has just the fucking right amount. You know what I mean? It doesn't have too many details. It doesn't have an overabundance of details. It has just the right amount. And as a hypothetical ethical thought experiment, this doctrine of eternal recurrence allows us to fucking set to frame, if you will, the issues that are the events that we're going to engage in and determine which one of these are the perfect stroke, if you will, that I should engage in while creating this, grand piece of work of my life. You know what I mean? Because these strokes, these brush strokes matter, dog. When you're creating a painting, every choice has to be intentional. And even the ones that are seemingly fucking, even the most seemingly inconsequential can serve to distract or perhaps, take away from a great piece of art, right? So in that particular sense, then, this recurrence, realistically, it acts as a test for perfection, basically, okay? And it's from here where we get to start to see just how daunting the task of the uber-mensch truly is. You know what I mean? Because it magnifies infinitely every moment of boredom, every moment of despair, every moment of frustration, homie. These are all amplified, again, infinitely by this doctrine. The test itself, it lies in this magnification, particularly of faults, which may be easily ignored. You know what I mean? Take boredom, for instance, dog. That's a fault. Don't get it twisted. By absolute fucking no stretch of the imagination is Nietzsche a fan of boredom. You know what I mean? And it's something, he's got interesting views on boredom, dog. But one of them, the more interesting ones, is perhaps that he tells us that it's something that even the gods struggle with. You know what I mean? That humans were only created, for instance, man specifically, was only created because God itself got bored. You know what I mean? And then from there, everything else was created because even man eventually got bored. And then, animals and women and all that kind of shit comes afterwards. And it's all because of boredom, according to Nietzsche. You know what I mean? But in the sense of being a fault is because you got to, again, contextualize it in terms of who Nietzsche was as a person. And who he was a sickly motherfucker who had this grand inspiration. You know, he was a grand philosopher and he had a lot of ideas that he wanted to write down. But he's fucking struck ill by this fucking sickness and he doesn't have much time to be able to do so. So the time that he does have at his dispense, it's very precious to him because he understands it as being fleeting in the sense that he might be healthy now, but eventually his illness is going to fucking flare up again and he's going to be incapacitated for days and weeks on end, right? So this idea of boredom is like, what do you mean you're bored, dog? Like, this is a precious moment that you have right now to go off and do some shit that you're otherwise never going to be afforded the opportunity to ever do so ever again. The same here being with like laziness and all that other kinds of fucking vices that keep us, from engaging in these actions that ideally help us paint. They're the brushstrokes that paint for us the fucking grand work of art that we hope our life to become. Anyways, for now, the importance of understanding the emphasis or the doctrine of the eternal recurrence is on the emphasis of the present moment, dog. So, I mean, this is, typical existentialist shit right here, okay? Not concerning ourselves with the past or the future, not rationalizing our actions in accordance to either, but focusing on the here and now, bro, the here and now, because this is all that we have at any given moment. Doesn't matter if it is in the fucking actual past or the present. You know what I mean? The here and now is all that we have, okay? So I know, like for me personally, a great example of this that really resonated with me was when I was going through graduate school. Okay. It's just school in general, dog. I've always hated school. I've always been good at school, but I've always fucking hated it. You know what I mean? It's just so tedious and boring. And I find this to also be the case with my current students, which is why this is why I bring up the school example. You know what I mean? Specifically for me, I would justify the current unhappiness, the boredom and the tediousness and the just fucking anger that especially graduate school, dog. that kind of shit would cause. You know what I mean? That, that the school would cause me. And I would justify it by just considering the potential future outcome of doing so. Typical, just suck it up, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, buckle down and get it shit done. You know what I mean? It can get a lot of shit done. It can get a lot of shit done, that attitude. I'm not going to knock it. You know what I mean? But it does come at a price. Okay? And for me, I sure as fuck did that through graduate school, dog. And, even though school itself, again, was easy for me, I'm telling you, man, I fucking hated every moment of it. And despite the outright anger and hatred that I had for it, no matter how unhappy it made me, bro, at the moment, I always would just grin and bear it because I would just justify it in terms of the future benefit. Now, to be fair, obviously, I've been teaching philosophy, professionally for almost 7 years now. Okay, so the wager, I guess, if you will, proved to be fairly true in the sense that, yeah, I did fucking have to suck it up for like 5-6 years, but it was ideally worth it because now I get to teach philosophy or whatever. You know what I mean? But that's only in retrospect, dog. And, like Kierkegaard tells us, life is only understood backwards. We have to live that shit forward. And in this case, what it means is that I sacrificed a lot of time, bro, I'm not trying to lament. I'm not trying to be like, woe is I type shit, but I'm telling you, like, yeah, it was a sacrifice, bro. And not just me, you too. You know what I mean? Like, you've got a passion project and it's, maybe you're the one in school, maybe you're the one in work, and maybe you're the one thinking about how the potential future benefits outweigh the, the current moment. You know what I mean? But, and if that's the case, like me, you're also going to have to sacrifice a lot of time and a lot of energy in school, in work, and whatever it is that you feel is important in your life. You know what I mean? And it's energy that could be directed towards other more perhaps important shit like family and friends. For me, ideally, like I would, if I could go back, I would focus less time on putting such an emphasis on school. Yeah, I would still graduate. Don't get me twisted, but I wouldn't fucking do so at the expense of how much time I sacrificed to my family and friends. Like I would prioritize more my family and friends in retrospect. You know what I mean? And I did it despite however much unhappiness I experienced. Okay. And because of that, it undoubtedly had an effect on both of those relationships for me. You know what I mean? And that's not just me. That's everybody. That's cats in the cradle with the silver spoon. You know what I mean? It's just a tried and true truth, bro. And what makes it more complicated is that, again, while I have the luxury of being able to have, so far at least, a benefited 7 years from that, time that I spent in graduate school specifically, that's something that I'm only able to do because, I'm fortunate enough to still be alive right now. Okay. And the reality is that it's basically, it's not, I don't want to say by chance, you know what I mean? But it's just never a given, dog. We like to think to ourselves that we're going to live long, fucking happy lives up until our fucking elderly days when we die surrounded by our loved ones in our bed. But it's just as true that you could be fucking struck down at the age of 30, 34, 25, 22, all ages that I've lost people in my life. You know what I mean? And that's it, homie. Like the opportunity to do anything is gone. You know what I mean? So I'm fortunate and I'm thankful that I'm at where I'm at right now. But imagine if I didn't get the opportunity to have these years because I had grinned and bared it all through graduate school. The only time that I had the present moment at that time, you know what I mean? And I fucking completely put it aside in hopes for this future moment that didn't even exist at the time. You know what I mean? That would have fucking sucked because that would have been the only time that I would have had to, experience the joy of my family and friends. And it was fucking wasted on some bullshit like making sure I was fucking reading or had fucking completed a writing assignment. Like, nah, dog, that shit's not important, homie. You know what I mean? So it's just the point that I'm trying to make essentially is that it's never a guarantee. It's never a guarantee that we will live to see the life that we envision for ourselves. You know what I mean? Whenever the time may be. And that ignoring that life at the present moment to focus on the future is perhaps the greatest the greatest betrayal, if you will, specifically for Nietzsche, right? Of life. It's at least, I don't want to say, for sure, one of the greatest betrayals of life for Nietzsche, okay? And I guess me too, because I do fucking feel that way. You know what I mean? Anyways, the idea here is that the experience that we have doing so isn't some shit that should just be ignored. So like the unhappiness that you have when you're going through a tedious event in your life, whether it be school, work, a relationship, you know what I mean? That shit is not something that should just be ignored, dog. There's a reason why, okay? It's causing us psychological distress, whatever form it may partake in. You know, despair, dread, terror, anxiety, psychological despair, okay? And the reason is because it's trying to teach us something, dog. And by ignoring the distress that we're experiencing at that particular moment, we're basically ignoring the fucking lesson that is trying to be taught to us. You know what I mean? So what this doctrine of eternal recurrence is doing is it's going to flip the script and tell us, no, quit thinking about the future, this imagined future that doesn't even exist, and focus instead on this present moment that absolutely does exist. Focus on the fucking the sequential events that are occurring in your life right now and the ensuing emotional states that they cause. Are they causing states of great joy and happiness and pleasure? Or are they causing states of immense psychological distress? Because if they're causing the latter, ideally it's going to cause, especially if we allow these chains of events to, pile on, they're going to cause us to live a life that's not really very desirable. And then when you do get visited by that demon, it's going to come to you and say, this life as you're living it in every single fucking event, way, shape, or form, you're going to live it an infinitely many number of times. That's a terrifying and haunting fucking consideration, right? As opposed to that life where we're not experiencing psychological distress, but we are experiencing joy and happiness and pleasure instead. At which case we'd be like, fuck yeah, I can't wait to continue living this life an infinitely many number of times because I'm doing it correctly. And naturally, the only way that we could do so, at least according to Nietzsche, is by emphasizing the importance of every single fucking event of our present moment. Because again, it's all that we have, right? He's going to tell us that when an action is unbearable, we need to imagine ourselves having to suffer through it an infinitely many number of times. Again, to consider whether it's even worth suffering for, even just once, yo. And the idea here is that, well, this is not like directly from Nietzsche, but you can derive from this idea is that this shit helps to build character, yo. Or perhaps better stated, it helps to strengthen the heart and the face. And, doing shit like saying no to the shit that makes us unhappy. It's a skill that, many only wish to possess, despite the fact that every single one of us absolutely can develop this skill at any given moment. You know what I mean? You right now, today, at this moment, listening to this shit right here, you can choose to be a more assertive person. You could choose to stand up for yourself. You can choose to fucking live live your truth. You know what I mean? It's something that we can all do at every given moment. It's not something that just an idealized person can do and we live vicariously through them, never experiencing any of the real happiness and joy inherent with, the way that we imagine they're doing so because of their ability to stand up for themselves, to be assertive, to go confidently in the direction of their dreams, if you will, and all that kind of shit. You know what I mean? You can do that right here, every single moment. But, unfortunately, too often, we explain away this ability by simply appealing to the indefinite future, where we imagine the anger, the frustration, the pain, etc., will no longer exist. We say to ourselves, you know what, this fucking sucks right now, but if I can just grin and bear it, it won't suck in 5 years when I have my degree, when I have the promotion, when I have the relationship, etc. To which Nietzsche is saying, bro, you got this shit all twisted, dog, because you might not even be here in 5 years, homie. You're here right now. And if this shit is causing you fucking mad distress, it's for a reason. And you need to focus on that reason so that you can fucking alter it and, flip ideally those experiences, because that's all you got, homie. They're all you got. So in this particular sense, then I guess we can understand why it's often said that Nietzsche is more of a psychologist really than a philosopher. And that, this doctrine of eternal recurrence, it's a prime example of why. Because it's asking us essentially to consider the merit of every moment. And that if ever there is one that is psychologically intolerable, that it should be rejected on the pain of having to experience it an infinite many number of times again. Now, this doctrine, it's important for many reasons, dog. One of which being that it does a great job of justifying some of Nietzsche's more powerful and influential philosophical beefs that, they help us understand, if you will, the rationale behind them and his philosophy. And I guess perhaps the most important, again, is his critique of the diminution of life by religion, specifically Christianity for Nietzsche, okay? Because it's always telling motherfuckers to focus on the afterlife and not concern ourselves with this life, right? Which is absurd for Nietzsche because, beyond his views on the will to power about how all of life is the will to power, you know what I mean? It's very life affirming. This is, it's absurd to him because it's fucking weird to completely ignore this one life in favor for this indeterminate afterlife, given that this is the only life that we for sure know that we have, right? And his second beef, the most influential philosophical beef that he has that, this eternal recurrence helps explain is that with Hegel and Darwin, who both assume that life is evolving, if you will, towards some higher purpose or order, okay? And that's just not true for Nietzsche, right? He feels as though life, it simply just repeats back into itself. Unlike Hegel with his teleological unveiling of spirit and Darwin with his fucking survival of the fittest towards some evolutionary fucking goal or whatever, right? It's not the case for Nietzsche, dog. Life is just simply repeating back into itself. So basically it's some more Nawa shit, dog, right? It's non-teleological and is non-hierarchized, okay? Now, suffice to say, when I first read this theory, dog, this shit really resonated with me, homie. Specifically the idea of reincarnation, because again, probably like you, it's something that I fucking have thought about plenty of times in life. You know what I mean? And while this isn't something that Nietzsche would probably condone, given that it would strip the present moment of its importance, it is, because if you live an infinitely many number of times, like, well, damn, this moment doesn't necessarily seem that important, right? Well, in the sense that you can fucking, have another chance to just do it all over again. But no, it's important for Nietzsche in the sense that you're gonna live it the same moment over and over again. So you have to fucking put an importance on it, right? Anyways, it's something that I was always drawn to since childhood. And, as I've discussed before, Nietzsche's not gospel, dog, and you could deviate from the shit that he talks about with no problem, right? And anyways, even though for me, like, it was something I was interested in, I never truly studied it until my early 20s. And, the reason why, in all honesty, was because of this wild, crazy ass dream that I had, dog. Now, before I get into the dream, I guess it's important to first qualify it by stating that, that afternoon before I had the dream, I was actually watching a documentary on the distinction between Stephen Hawking's views of physics and Leonard Susskind's views of physics, okay? And it was an interesting dream, dog. It was an interesting dream, dog, because that's where I learned about the doctrine of eternal recurrence, all right? Even though I've never even read Nietzsche up until that point. I had this dream like in 2010. I didn't really start reading Nietzsche until 2011, right? And then after that dream, bro, like for the next 10 years, basically, I was convinced that, not only do we do incarnate, but that we would continue to do so an infinite many number of times until we get it right, if you will, right? And that in doing so, we'd be able to escape the cycle entirely. So some typical Buddhist type shit, right? Despite the fact that, again, I wasn't really versed. The reason I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, dog. I'm trying to say is that we have this idea that we have this belief that these ideas are somehow reserved to like the special places of textbook as the only source of getting them from knowledge. But I don't think that's true, dog. I think there is so much knowledge that can in fact be gained in the dream world that the Western world has tried to convince us is fucking irrational. Like the Western world will have us believe that there is no such thing as a dream world, and whatever knowledge that we get from the dreams isn't real knowledge. It's just fucking a hallucinatory event. And I don't think that's true, dog. And in fact, given the Nawa philosophy, I have no reason to believe that that's true. You know what I mean? Because the Nawa didn't distinguish between the sleeping realm and the sleeping consciousness and the waking consciousness. And they felt that the knowledge that we received in the dream world was just as viable as the knowledge that we received in the waking world. You know what I mean? So I guess with that in mind, the basic idea here with the fucking dream was like, it was weird, dog. It really was weird. I remember the dream. I wrote it down. Like I remember, like it was such a powerful dream that when I woke up, I was like, boom, I got to write this shit down. The part that really resonated with me is that I heard a voice, the voice of a girl, like a young girl, which I would later come to associate with my daughter, right? Because she was due to be born around this time. And I I don't even know why. I just associated with her, dog. And at first, I was trying to ignore it in my sleep, but I remember it getting like louder and more consistent. Okay, and it became something of a mantra, even what she was telling me, dog, until it finally managed to wake me up from my dream. And basically, the mantra was psychic determinism based on the black hole theory, right? So again, I was fucking watching this whole documentary with Susskind and Hawkins, and I wake up from this dream. I wrote down a time. It was at 7:31 a.m. on September 27th, 2010, right? And all I was saying to myself is psychic determinism based on the black hole theory, right? To further qualify this, at the same time that I was, that this was going down, I was actually taking a philosophy of religion class, right? It's my first philosophy class, the fall semester of 2010. And I remember at that time that we were going over the attributes of God, okay? And we began discussing God as necessary. And the prospect of what I have, this idea of God as necessary, this is what I associated with the notion of psychic determinism, okay? And it's not something that is going to be found like in a textbook per se, because that's just how it helped me personally make sense of what the fuck I was what I was intellectualizing by the idea of God as necessary, okay? And the basic idea is that, you start with A and B and you get to C and D, and that you cannot get to D without first having been to C, and that without B, we would not be able to get to C, and that without A, none of it would have even been possible in the first place, right? And that thus this in turn renders A as necessary and all the rest as mere possibilities, okay? So this is basically like the grandfather effect, if you will, in quantum physics. This is a necessary thing that must occur, or else everything else will not occur for certain, right? And even if it does occur, everything else that does occur after it is just a matter of possibility. It's not a given. It's not for sure. I remember, like, as I was contextualizing this, I couldn't help think to myself at the time that if this is all true, how do we explain karma, bro? Because if all of life's events are merely singularities, predetermined by the necessary, the starting condition, how can the notion of it coming back around be considered a piece of the puzzle? Now, the reason the idea of karma really started to it really fucked with me when I was learning about this kind of shit is because the idea of karma implies the idea of rebirth. You'd have to be able to be reborn again, you know what I mean, in order for karma to be able to take hold. And if we have these fucking necessary and causally related events, ideally that would imply that it would somewhere within that chain of sequences from point A, now let's go all the way to Z, inevitably it would have to imply the ability to be able to reincarnate, because if you weren't able to reincarnate, then it would fucking completely dispel the idea of karma. You know what I mean? So then my mind started to wonder to myself, like, well, then how the fuck is karma possible then without reincarnation? And if that's the case, is reincarnation actually possible? And can it be detracted from these causally related events, which are, justified by physics, which tells us that there was an initial Big Bang, for instance, you know what I mean? And that everything that occurs after that is a series of fucking, determined events that are causally related. You know what I mean? So, and going back to this dream, dog, that's when I started to realize, like, oh shit, this is kind of what it's trying to tell me, this psychic determinism. But it's not necessarily psychic determinism so much as it is this fucking this premeditated sequence of events that you're just going to constantly fucking be fluctuating through. You know what I mean? And in terms of the idea of reincarnation, it's actually not as absurd as it may sound to be, because these actions that we engage in, they dispel energy, okay? And this is where that whole fucking Leonard Susskind and, Stephen Hawking shit comes in. Energy is released, energy it's expounded and it's sent somewhere. It doesn't dissipate. Energy does not dissipate. It never ceases to exist, right? And if what we're told about black holes is true, they suck up all energy, all information. So in my mind, back in 2010, I was thinking to myself, like, does that mean that the actions that we engage in here on Earth, the energy that they release, it's going to get sucked back into this black hole? Anyways, this is all some shit that I'm looking to fucking work on for another podcast at some other day. The implications between the black hole wars, if you will, between Leonard Susskind and Stephen Hawking. And I'll further elaborate on that idea when the time comes. But for now, I guess the most important thing is just to state that for the longest time, I was convinced that, we cycle in and out this bitch an infinitely many number of times. And that the goal essentially was to, again, to get it right so that we could escape this fucking cycle and, not have to experience it ever again. That was fucking 10 years ago, homie, or fucking 12 years ago at this point. You know what I mean? And a lot changes in that time. You know what I mean? Not just the ideas of cycling back in and out of, a reality, but, this notion of trying to escape reality to begin with. Because now, back then I wasn't a Christian, but I only had a Christian framework to understand reality because I didn't even know what the fuck indigenizing was back then. You know what I mean? And because of that, I only had that one framework to operate within. And now I don't see, there's just this, you know what I mean? I am a monist. I can gladly express that. And that as a monist, there is nothing to escape from. There is only reality. You know what I mean? And perhaps most importantly, I am a life affirmer. I would like to consider myself a life affirmer. And because of that, I don't necessarily see the need to want to escape this because as fucking chaotic as life may be, it's still pretty fucking awesome. You know what I mean? And I guess perhaps most importantly, it was the death of my brother that really, really fucking, just learning when he had cancer for the first time, like 3 years ago. That's what really like completely undid this belief in, at the time, of eternal recurrence in me. And the reason being is because, I just couldn't make sense of how something like that could happen to him, And it's just, I don't know, it's just weird because he was such a good dude, man, and he didn't deserve to go out the way that he did. And the idea that he would have to continue to do so an infinite many number of times, it really fucked with me, dog. So much so that I got to the point where I just gave up on the idea entirely because I was like, this just doesn't make sense, man. That, again, at least for my brother, it didn't make sense that he would have to suffer so needlessly, seemingly needlessly for the entirety of eternity. You know what I mean? But then some shit happened like just 1 week ago, dog. Literally just 1 week ago. I guess maybe like 2 weeks ago now. Okay. But I learned about it 1 week ago. And what it was is this news about this fucking energy that's been able to escape a black hole for the first time. Okay. Well, not for the first time. Let me be very clear about what happened. There was news that for the first time, the Hubble telescope for NASA, shout out NASA, Project Bluebeam, for the first time, it spotted a 500 light year long umbilical cord for baby stars, right? Which lends credence to the idea that energy can escape black holes, which is fucking hugely important for this fucking dream that I'm telling you about and the whole idea of psychic determinism, because basically what it was, again, is this notion that energy is entered into a black hole and that this black hole is the impetus for the birth of it's like the impetus for the Big Bang, essentially, right? And that if all the energy is stored in there, then it just stands to reason that it could be retracted from there. And if it's retracted from there, it could be pieced together and made a whole once more, meaning that your life, my life, and all the sequential actions of events can in fact take place once more. You know what I mean? So this is why for me, I was reading this shit and I was like, yo, that's a fucking trip, dog. Like, this is exactly what it was that I was dreaming about, that about how it is about this eternal recurrence ideas and all that. You know what I mean? And if this information can in fact escape the black holes, dog, then, it's possible that if they themselves are responsible for the creation of the universe, it gives me hope that maybe in some way, dog, it implies that, it will contain the information, not just of our rebirth, but an infinite, not just of our rebirth once, but an infinite many number of times moving forward, because it does imply that I will in fact get to see my brother once more, an infinitely many number of times. You know what I mean? And obviously it rings true for Nietzsche's eternal recurrence as well. Anyways, in conclusion, man, we're just finding this fucking sad boy emo shit down to a fucking end. You know what I mean? I guess now more than ever, I've been renewed with this fucking newfound hope that, again, not only will my brother reincarnate in the form that I've known him, but that he'll have the opportunity, dog, perhaps even to alter his fate, right? The Nawa tell us that, yeah, we have the opportunity to alter our fate. You know what I mean? And, if doing so, it implies that maybe he won't necessarily meet the same demise, okay? He'll have the ability to make different choices. He won't join the fucking Marines. He won't, get stationed where he's going to be exposed to hazardous chemicals and all that other kind of shit. And that because of that, he'll have the ability to, alter his fate in the sense that he won't die just so fucking painfully from cancer. You know what I mean? Or maybe not, dog. You know, maybe not. Maybe this is all just copium on my behalf. Maybe it's hopium. Maybe it's a little bit of both. I don't know. All I know is that, as I've stated many times, this philosophy shit, it's a very powerful tool that can help us deal with more than in life than just figuring out what 2 + 2 = and why. You know what I mean? This can be a very comforting tool, philosophy can. And for me personally, this Nietzschean philosophy is not just some of the most comforting, but it's some of the most influential philosophy, because it helps me contextualize the importance of every single it just helps me with a lot of ways, dog. Like if I can go back in time, I would spend more time with my brother. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't have focused so much on graduate school. I'm glad I did, because it's afforded me the opportunity to give you this podcast, but I could have got C's and still ended up where I'm at today, dog. You know what I mean? If I could go back in time, I could do all kinds of shit, but I can't do that. I only have this present moment right here, right now. And what I can do now is, use this doctrine of eternal recurrence and, as a way to measure the actions that I do want to engage in, so that hopefully if I do have this future where I'm able to look back on where I am at the current moment, I won't be doing so with fucking lament and regret, as, the case with my brother. And perhaps most importantly, that if it is fucking true, that it does mean that we will fucking reincarnate an infinite many number of times, and that I will in fact get to see and hold and be with my brother again once more, right? And yeah, I guess this is about as good a point as any to go ahead and wrap this bitch up. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and if not, I hope you find something that you do. Until then, I hope you all have a great day, night, evening, whenever the fuck it is that you're listening to this, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.